All right, let's get started. So, hi everyone, my name's Josh. You can see my credentials here on the shared screen. So, I work at XBM, a Valiantys company, as a team builder and an internal coach. I also do work as a facilitator, and where it says MBTI on there, that means Myers-Briggs type indicator. So, I am trained as a facilitator for the Myers-Briggs personality system, which I've found is a really great way to help people mesh when they're in kind of a new environment and getting to know each other because we're all pretty different. So that's who I am. On the whole, though, my goal is to teach people the soft skills they need to know in order to kind of thrive in their work environment, either working as teams or working with clients. So we're going to jump in. In this webinar today, I am going to be discussing how you can provoke productive conflict on your team and train your team to get the most out of it. Conflict is uncomfortable, so we naturally avoid it. And when we do, we lose the benefit of everyone's unfiltered ideas or opinions. That is why, and I'll be stressing this kind of throughout, conflict can only happen in an environment where trust has already been established. So conflict is incredibly useful and it is uncomfortable. And because it's uncomfortable, it's really important that people trust each other when they engage with it. In this talk, you're going to learn how to safely nurture productive conflict on your team and get a peek into how I use tabletop role-playing games to take it to the next level and practice it in a different environment that you would normally see on your team. So that is what we will be doing today. Actually, before I go any further, I do want to provide some information about us, who we are as a company, and give you a sense of what XBM is and what XBM does. We are a platinum solution partner with Atlassian. That means we partner with Atlassian to help enable their users with their products. So if you've ever struggled with Jira or Bitbucket or Confluence, we're the folks who come in and offer you training to get the most out of those tools, get over your roadblocks, and kind of pierce the parts that are difficult to understand. And we do that with a series of services. We offer training, so that includes boot camps, as well as deep dives. The Atlassian User Academy, which is more Jira Bootcamp, is like for Jira administrators. Atlassian User Academy is just for your average user. You can see a link in the chat to learn more about these training options, and go to our website and dig a little bit deeper. You can actually join in the ones that we have scheduled already and see if it's a good fit for your company. We also do individual trainings at companies. As well, we also offer workshops geared towards helping your teams work together better, which is what I do. I'll talk more about that later. And we also just offer consulting, strategic consulting, work organization consulting, everything we can to help you maximize the efficiency and be able to track everything that you're doing throughout work. We also have a full stack team of developers, so we offer custom solutions to your products and problems. Okay, that is what I want to say about that. All right, so let's jump back into conflict. So I want to talk a little bit about the theory before I get into practical tools for nurturing conflict, because I think that the theory is important. The theory that we base this on is a book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And we found this because of the pandemic. So this is our office here in St. Louis. It's really beautiful. It's nice. It's on the 3rd floor of a little building. And before the pandemic, we had a really rich, thriving culture where we would all have a lunch together and bond. It was a really nice place for people to exchange ideas, but also to feel comfortable with each other, to basically trust each other, and to share their inspirations or their new ideas and innovate very quickly and very flexibly. As well, people just enjoyed being around each other, which was great. We would all have lunch together on that sort of table area you see off on the right. And that was a sacred space for us. Like everyone would drop their work and go do lunch as a company. So that was really essential for our company culture. And then the pandemic happened and that threw a wrench in the whole thing. All of a sudden, people who had been in contact every day weren't talking to each other. We kind of realized all of a sudden they hadn't talked for months with each other. And that's a major breakdown in terms of people sharing ideas and people being on the same page, as well as just maintaining strong relationships and bonds. So we started to go into the literature and brainstorm. We kind of created a book club, a virtual book club, to talk about these issues because we felt they were important and that our culture was eroding now that we had become virtual. I think a lot of companies struggled with going fully virtual like that and maintaining their processes as well as maintaining their relationships between their people. So this was a big itch for us to scratch. So we jumped into it and we pulled together the 5 dysfunctions of a team. The 5 dysfunctions of a team is a book by Patrick Lencioni, and it lists these 5 dysfunctions that can be happening on a team that kind of erodes the team performance. And these can happen, for one, they're subtle. Not every team can address them or even recognize that they're happening. They just know that they're having a problem and they're not sure what it is. And this can also impact teams that have all of the resources that they need to succeed. They have a good market, they have a good product, they have enough money, and yet they may still fail to perform because these are present. So we weren't quite at that phase, but we were concerned that if we left this unattended for too long, that we would end up there. So we dug into the 5 dysfunctions, and the first one we came to, which is at the base of the pyramid, lack of trust. And trust is essential. I have another webinar where I go into how to build trust, and am happy to talk about that there. But essentially, it's just that people need to be able to get to know each other and feel comfortable around each other, or comfortable being uncomfortable around each other. You need kind of that human connection, know that the other person has your best interest at heart, and the company's best interest at heart too. So that's really essential. There are tons of environments where trust is not present, and you get things like fighting over resources, people not sharing information, and a lot of blame. So first off, that was an issue that we knew we needed to correct. And we did that with a series of onboarding, Myers-Briggs sessions, and a couple of other tactics to build our community back. But today we're going to be talking about the second dysfunction, which is a lack of conflict. This is people being afraid and avoiding voicing their disagreements with each other. And although it might seem counterintuitive that conflict is useful, it's very, very useful. None of us has the full picture. And so engaging in conflict and hearing everyone's viewpoints, including where they disagree, and working out to what the actual best solution is, kind of like underneath that disagreement, that's the process that we knew we wanted to cultivate on our teams. So let's see. Granted, I am talking about a theory here. So if you, while you're watching this, have any, well, yeah, but what about this, or how about that? Feel free to put it in the chat or include it in the comments of the YouTube video. I'm more than happy to address it. I'm all about the application of theory. So if you're intelligent and you're engaging with what I'm saying, you'll probably have questions about, like, is this fully real? So if you want to message in the Q&A, that's totally private. I'll be really curious to hear it and I can address it to the group. All right, so that is the model of the 5 dysfunctions. We're only going to focus on those bottom 2. The other ones sort of come into play later. But I do want to take a second and talk about what I mean when I say conflict, because conflict can mean a lot of things. I'm not talking about war. I'm not talking about a fist fight. I'm not talking about a shouting match. Conflict is simply an anxious situation that needs to be resolved. So, will we be able to get enough clients in the next quarter? Is this particular marketing strategy the best way for us to get clients? Is it really working? Is our product as good as our competitors' products? How can we make it better? That's the conflict. And each one is kind of like, the last one is sort of company versus company, their product versus our product. Then there's the company versus the market, what the market is willing to buy, what it's willing to get. Each one of these is a conflict that we need to focus on, and that is primary to the business's survival. And what's amazing about talking about these conflicts is that they're kind of in the space, and it's important to be able to discuss it so people know what's actually at stake. Um, and doing so really engages people. Movies use conflict all the time, and they'll often put it out in the first 5 to 10 minutes. To use a topical example, the Barbie movie, it's kind of like Barbie versus existential dread, as she's living this perfect life and all of Barbie world is perfect. And then when the first 20 minutes or so, she says, I've been thinking about death and I noticed there's cellulite on my legs. And the whole party around her stops. Everyone's like, whoa, that's not what Barbie's about at all. So that's the conflict that the character is then trying to solve throughout the movie. What do I do about existence? What do I do about death? And that's what the conflict the movie hopes to address throughout it, what it is. And that's what makes it engaging, is watching the character go and attempt to solve it. And we're getting closer to one of the tools, the first tool that I'll bring up. But before I do that, again, the stakes, what is at stake, is why you need to have conflict. There is not room to make bad decisions. Well, there is room to learn and fail and grow, but there's certainly not room to ignore the conflict, to say that, oh, well, I'm sure everyone in the market's going to want to buy our product and what we're doing is working fine. If you just go in with that attitude, then you're going to miss things. And you're not going to address if your strategy is actually effective or not. Is your marketing strategy working? Is it garnering the leads that you want it to, nurturing the clients that you want it to? Well, if it's not, then that's what's at stake, the success of your product. It's actually very important to bring up. And there's going to be consequences, good or bad, however this situation plays out. It's going to impact your career, the success of your mission, and your daily lives. Ultimately, what you're working on, you want to feel that what you're doing has purpose and is going to be successful. Nobody wants to be on a losing team. So it's really important to address these issues and talk about them either as a team or as a group, in terms of leadership. This can be talked about on lots of different levels. So that's why conflict is important. And what I want to suggest is, what if our meetings could be as engaging as a great movie or a great book? To do that, the team has to be aware of what is at stake. Just like you would show in a movie, you would let them know Barbie's having existential dread at the beginning. As soon as you can, if you want to engage your team, bring up the anxious situation that surrounds them. Provoke it right out of the gate. Let them know that if Darth Vader gets his hands on the rebel plans, that means that all is for naught. Present the conflict up front. That means if you're going into a meeting where you want to be able to discuss things that are crucial to the future of your team, right at the get-go, as soon as you can, tell them what is at stake. You know the issues that you're dealing with your particular team. I don't. You know what the stakes are. You know why you have to do a certain thing well. It can be uncomfortable for people to hear that things might not be going well, but it's important to bring it up. That's what's going to get them thinking about it. That discomfort is going to push them into solving it. This, again, is why it's important to have trust, that they trust you and the leadership. But if you have enough trust, bring it up and see what they say. Explain the danger of making a bad decision and why it's important to come to the best decision that you can for the future of your team, your company, your project, your initiative, whatever it is you're working on. So yeah, there are lots of examples we could come up for it. And I don't really need to tell you what keeps you up at night. I will, however, give you an example to illustrate the point really clearly here. This is from the 5 Dysfunctions of a Team book. So the book is not actually a theory until the very end of it. It's actually presented as a story, because the person who wrote it was a screenwriter, which I think is why he really appreciates the value of conflict. The book follows the story of a CEO named Catherine who's kind of joining a dysfunctional executive team in Silicon Valley. and they don't like each other. They don't talk very well. Their meetings are very tense and boring at the same time. That might seem familiar to you. And she has this company offsite. People don't want to go to the company offsite. Really, the stakes of the book are Catherine versus her dysfunctional team. Will the team be able to kind of confront this? Although it's not explicitly stated that that's what's going on, but as you read, you sort of get the sense that this is what she's fighting against: the lack of communication, the blame, the disengagement from meetings, people being on their laptops the whole meeting and not paying any attention as important points are brought up by the leader. So she creates a company offsite, and you can imagine kind of the scene where a lot of people don't want to be there. They're wondering, why are we here? Why are we not doing real work? They're all sitting around sort of quietly at the table. And then Catherine walks in, she sits down, and she says this quote: "Well, we have a more experienced and talented executive team than any of our competitors. We have more cash than they do. Thanks to Martin and his team, we have better core technology. And we have a more powerful board of directors. Yet in spite of all that, we are behind two of our competitors in terms of both revenue and customer growth. Can anyone here tell me why that is?" Silence. Now, I would argue that that's how you do it. That's how you bring up a serious conflict about the future of the company. Revenue, customer growth, totally key issues. But the silence that's meeting her is a lack of trust on the team. If the team trusted her, they might be willing to jump in and start to engage, but because they don't really trust each other, and maybe they blame each other, like, it's not my fault, it's that person's fault that we're not able to do it, they're kind of unwilling to engage because they know any conflict would be really unhealthy. So that is kind of it. Teams that are willing, however, to engage in passionate debate will make better decisions, present flaws in arguments, create new possibilities for what can be opened up, and can even start to creatively problem solve about the best way to approach a situation. And that open, passionate disagreement, while mutual respect is maintained, is an ideal state to be in. The drama of it keeps us engaged and on the edge of our seats, and the team becomes much more engaged in making a better decision. I mean, just look at your own experience. How much better are the results of the meetings where you're really engaged in the meeting? And how are the ones where you're just checked out and bored and resigned and just trying to get through it? Probably not as much as getting accomplished in that second one. But as I've been saying this whole time, stoking the flames of conflict can come crashing down if you don't have trust established. And just to point out what a lack of trust is, and if you recognize these things in your team, check out our trust webinar. Strongly recommend taking a look at that. So if you look at the right column here, unhealthy, destructive conflict. People are unwilling to be seen as wrong. They are also unwilling to admit their shortcomings. You might sort of notice this with folks who don't want to kind of own up to the fact that the way that they've been approaching something might not be working, or that their lack of communication is somehow their fault. They might say, well, I don't really talk with that team because I just, like, she always gets in the way. She always holds me back. You know, they might have an excuse like that, a justification for why they don't engage or talk with another team, for example. But it's that blame and trying to put it on someone else's thing instead of taking responsibility for your part of it that is a key indicator there's some unhealthy conflict going on here. There's also probably going to be judgment, people judging other people's performance, saying things in unkind or sarcastic tones, things that sort of deal additional emotional damage on top of, like, the disagreement. Now, we're all able to weather that, some better than others. And just because someone's being judgmental doesn't mean they don't have a good point, but that does indicate that they're comparing and sort of prioritize their own viewpoint over another's to the point where it might be destructive. Worse, you can also see false attributions for people's behavior. Let's think of an example here. There's this principle of false attribution where you assume that another person is doing something because they want to get you, or they don't like you, or they want your initiative to fail. And generally, that's an illusion. That's actually not true. That's not why they're making the decisions that they're making. In a super dysfunctional system, maybe, yeah, that is why they're doing it. But more than likely, they're trying to protect their own department, trying to keep their job, um, trying to avoid conflict. They're not sure if you're someone who can be trusted. All these things are just as likely to be attributive. And also, we can fail to take into account a person's upbringing and what they've had to deal with in their life, why they might be the way that they are. And that lack of understanding often manifests in blame or sort of difficulty. This can also create power struggles or people shutting down, lots of anger and annoyance if you notice yourself feeling that, as well as stress, reactivity, and blame. If you get an email from someone, roll your eyes and start to get mad and like prep an email to their manager or to your best friend about their behavior, that's unhealthy conflict. That's definitely not working for you. And your team should do things to reestablish trust. It can also be pretty hard to come back from when that happens. So if you're listening and thinking about not wanting that to happen for your own company, some great strategies out of the gate are kickoffs to build trust with the beginning of like at the beginning of teams, and great onboarding, really establishing your company culture and building in that you're a company that can be trusted. That is essential to building that and kind of staying off of this really unhealthy conflict. But healthy, productive conflict looks really different. People are passionate and engaged. They engaged in an ideological debate. It never gets personal. And even if it, to be honest, it's always going to feel a little personal when you have an idea that you think is going to work and someone else shoots it down and tells you, yeah, you're actually not really thinking about this thoroughly. But if you're willing to reconsider your positions and listen to understand what the other person has to say, then you're engaging in productive conflict. It might not feel great, but it's gonna produce a better result, and it will feel really good when you're all aligned about what you want to do as a team. This can also point out critical flaws. Nobody is trying to protect their self-image. Again, nobody has a problem admitting when they're wrong. And also nothing's held back. And because nothing is held back, when you do finally come to an agreement as a team on what you want to do, you'll find that even the people who disagreed, because they were heard, they're going to get on board wholeheartedly to what the team decides to do, because at the end of the day, you all have to be rowing in the same direction to get the most out of this. So that's essential. I wanted to point all that out because I think it's important to be able to recognize this. So yeah, ensure a basis of trust. Things can get really personal in conflict. That's what makes it uncomfortable. If you think about an experience in your life where a friend might have given you a difficult piece of advice, maybe the person you're dating isn't the right person for you, or maybe your college degree isn't as useful as you thought it would be. Maybe you spent too much time avoiding a certain conversation or avoiding going out on a job hunt, and someone close to you who cares about you gave you the hard truth and told you to get up and go do it. It can actually be very helpful to do that, even though it's not what you want to hear at the time. But if you know that they have your best interests at heart, if you can hear a hard truth, you'll be willing to let your guard down and trust them. If it's someone you don't trust telling you these things, you're going to push it away because you don't want to deal with the thing anyway. You don't want to change. You don't want to do whatever it is they're telling you. And if it's someone you don't trust laying that on you, then you're going to reject it. I mean, if you think back to your own experience, I'm sure you'll find that to be true. All right. So that is what I want to say there. Next tool I want to cover here is mining for conflict. So mining for conflict is just calling out when there's something unspoken, get to the bottom of things. This is not trying to make problems when there aren't problems. You shouldn't just be creating conflict for conflict's sake. But this is about calling out when you see that there is something underneath that someone hasn't addressed so that it doesn't come up at the water cooler later on. Just so with this one great thing to do is remind everyone that we have the same goal. Like, look, we all want this marketing initiative to succeed. So it's important to me that everyone's on board. And I don't think it would be fair if we didn't hear everyone's viewpoint here. So if anyone hasn't spoken up, now's the time. Or Catherine, I notice you've been pretty quiet this meeting, and we've talked before one-on-one, and I know that you have some disagreements about this. I think the team could really benefit from hearing that, and bringing this up is important. Would you be willing to do that? That is going to open the door to it. Another thing you can do is, if your team isn't used to having conflict, explain to them the value of good conflict. Have them watch this video or clips from it that you feel would be useful. And let them get on board that conflict is actually something that you're looking for on your team. That way, when it happens, you can validate them. So Catherine, in that example, you say, hey, Catherine, would you please speak up and share why you don't think this marketing plan is going to go? And she goes, well, I just looked at our target audience and I feel like this isn't really, when I look at the numbers, most of our target audience isn't who we think it is. It's actually people with this set of interests. And I know you worked really hard on this marketing plan, Tony, but I just think it's a little off base. That can feel uncomfortable if she actually says it, and there might be silence. One thing you can do as a leader is validate them. Say, thank you for sharing that, Catherine. This is exactly what I was looking for. I'd love to hear this kind of debate. Tony, do you have a thought on this? And Tony says, well, yeah, I mean, I guess I didn't consider that part exactly, but it makes sense. Maybe we can have two target audiences. And then you sort of move the conversation forward that way. But you want to validate people because it is uncomfortable, and there can be a part of you that's like, no, I shouldn't do this. So validating and saying, no, this is what I'm looking for. I want you to be able to debate your ideas. That's going to engage the team. Honestly, I know that we're all adults and it feels like we should be able to do this, but I have found that telling the team that they are doing it right and that this is what we're looking for makes people feel relieved. I've worked with plenty of clients who I'm really scared are going to laugh at me when I tell them that, but I'm often pleased to see that they're kind of relaxed and willing to engage. I found that by and large, most folks want to treat each other well, and that they're more likely to just fall on the side of avoiding conflict because they don't want to hurt someone else's feelings. So just acknowledging that we all basically want the best for each other, and that what we're doing here is about creating the best product that we can and really doing that, and that actually engaging in this conflict is going to make us a better team. You just as the leader need to give them tools, encouragement, and room to learn, and make it kind of a safe place to do uncomfortable things. That is definitely the kind of leader that I've respected in my time, not the ones who are like cannot be perceived as wrong and just sort of give orders from on high. That tends to create more resentment than it does actual engagement in what the team's working on. So that that's what I wanted to say. And I think that a lot of the role of a leader is creating this safe space, thanking people for participating in this uncomfortable conversation does that. Lets everyone know, like, hey, we're all going to be safe. Nobody here is going to hurt each other, and I'm going to stand up to make sure that that's the case. Still, there can be a lot at stake in business meetings, and they can get tense, and it can sometimes be hard as a leader to hold our cool. So I found that at XBM, we've looked to create safe places to practice conflict and leverage the trust that we have. We believe that the soft skills that are there are incredibly important when dealing with clients, partners, and other internal colleagues. The lack of these skills can create unnecessary conflict, wall people off from each other, and cause bottlenecks because people are unwilling to communicate. So we've created these low stakes environments to practice conflict in an imaginary game. This is something I was alluding to earlier, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. Dungeons and Dragons. Don't know if you were expecting that. So this is an imaginary game that we run here at XBM, and we run it as a part of our culture, sort of to encourage play, but also to encourage people to practice these soft skills in an area outside of their normal sort of working environment, working with clients and stuff like that. This is a place where you can mess up and the consequences are fairly minor. But even though it's imaginary, it tends to feel very real, and people are still really engaged and sort of bringing their full selves to the experience. So just a couple caveats about this. This might not be right for every work culture. It works very well in cultures that prize creativity and innovation. And it works well in cultures that are, that's a good way to say this, I guess, open to be relaxed, open to having their folks bond outside of the workspace and bringing a sense of play to them. Play can be a very powerful tool when interacting with people. It typically sets people at ease. It engages us. It makes us feel better. So practicing playing with teams internally, we've found, has loosened people up, created more relationships and things like that. So even though this is just playing, it's been really effective. And I find that it builds on trust. So where trust already exists or people already understand each other to some degree, this can take that to a deeper level. Once we already trust each other, you start to ask some essential questions like, who are you really? What do you care about? What has your life been like? And who are we as a team? How do we define ourselves? And who could we be if we wanted to? So I found that this is a way to go deep in a culture that's already sort of thriving in its own way. All right, so that's what I want to say about that. Let me talk about what the game actually is, if you're still bought in and curious. So it is a board game, but it's not like your typical board game. Your typical board game is bounded by a certain set of rules, and you really can't go outside of those rules. In Monopoly, for example, you're stuck in the rules. This is how you play. And it's more strategic about how do I win is the goal. With a role-playing game, there are rules. But those rules are there more to contain and structure a story that we're all telling. The content of the game can be very different depending on who is playing it. And it functions very much like a choose your own adventure. You get to choose what you do in an open-ended story or scenario. The way it works is there's one player who is called the Dungeon Master who sets the field. They adjudicate the rules, and they also create the premise of the story. And then everyone else is a player who works as a team, similar to like the Lord of the Rings or any other, the Avengers, as a team of heroes working together to overcome the challenges that are presented to them in the story. So the Dungeon Master might say something like, a shot rings out and you all rise to your feet on the deck of your ship. It's been 3 hours of smooth sailing in the direction of the island where your treasure is buried, and you think you should be able to get there by noon. However, as you get up and survey the horizon, you see the flags of a familiar brigantine vessel, your old pirate ship with your old captain. Looks like he's got you in his sights. What do you want to do? And that is basically how the game works. Now notice I did a pirate theme here. Typically it's run in high fantasy, but we found that lots of different genres are fun for this. We can do pirates, middle school drama, whatever. There's plenty of things you can do. But the point is that kind of question of what do you all want to do? And the players get to make a choice about how do we act in this situation given these circumstances, and they do their best to overcome them. What's pretty cool about this game is that the setting is imaginary, but the feelings that happen are real. You still have discomfort about making a wrong decision or making a bad impact. Those who are less socially comfortable will still feel that way. And if you're winning and it's exciting, people are really going to engage. Now, I bring up this slide because I want to talk a little bit about one of our adventures in a second. But before I go into that, what I've found can be really nice about this game is people being inventive and trusting their instincts and surprising themselves with their contributions that they make as they get more and more invested in these stories. I had a player yesterday who had her character was stranded on an island with other pirates there around her. And she made a bold move and went to convince those pirates to join her own ship. And because of the circumstance of the story, it worked out in her favor. She was able to convince them, like, hey, your ship is getting sunk right now. I think you'd be a lot better working with me. And this created a huge thrill of accomplishment when it actually worked out. As the rest of her team was taking down that pirate ship, she was there all alone. These guys could have easily overpowered her, but because she was confident and stepped out and said this thing, she was able to showcase bravery and courage and ultimately build her team's trust in her because they knew that she could be relied on even when she was all on her own. So it can do that. It can sort of simulate this sense of purpose. It can simulate discoveries of a team, and on the whole, it's just a great simulation environment. So that is that. Let me show you our confluence space for this jungle adventure so that you can get a feel for what this is like. So we have this great little confluence here. Of course, we use Confluence internally. This is an Atlassian product. If you're not familiar with it and it looks like it'd be interesting or useful to you, please feel free to reach out. It's fun. It's like a Wikipedia for different. You create like a website and then you have different spaces inside of it. And we use this to manage our different games as well as even some of our sales and marketing material around Dungeons and Dragons. All right. Each team also that plays with me gets their own little cohort area. Just let this load. All right, great. Let's skip over that. So what this is a series of pages, essentially, that lays out everything you need to know for playing the game. During our first session, we'll usually go fairly deep into introducing this, but let me walk you through some of the kind of essential elements of how to play. First off, we do introductions. That's just creating kind of the boundaries, be kind to each other. Feel free to get up and walk around. Like we prefer you have your video on, things like that. And some icebreakers. And then we go into our social roles. I talk about being a player and a game master, which I just went over with you here, and how to play, which I also just went over with you here. And then talk about how the rules work, that we present the story first, and then when something exciting happens in the story, like you fire your cannons on an enemy ship and we want to see how that works out, we'll roll the dice. Let me make this a little bigger for everybody. Okay, great. So yeah, so we use the fiction first here. So this is just saying that the rules are there to guide the story, but we're going to focus on telling the story first, and then when something happens, you'll roll the dice. For example, I step into the tavern and wave to my colleagues is probably just something we can narrate since there's not really any danger involved. But if it's I draw my sword, take my breath, and charge, that's going to maybe involve more risk. So it's these things that involve risk or moments of dramatic tension that we roll dice for. And as players get more and more comfortable, they can take more and more risks in here, which is really fun to see. See the people on your team who are less courageous and more withdrawn stepping into bravery can be really cool. And again, this is a place where they can feel really safe to do that and develop that courage and that trust. So we really like that about the game. Dice roller, this just works over kind of what dice you need to roll. And this is a character sheet. Everybody gets a character when they play. And that character comes with a little bit of sort of pre-made stuff about who the character is, a belief, personal motivation, and a history. You can pause the video if you want to read through this stuff and think about if you would want to play a Johnny, the Carhu protector. This is someone who struggles with kind of what it means to have a family and what it means to protect other people and who's worth protecting. So that's kind of the internal struggle. So I often, encourage players who want to explore that side of themselves to play a Johnny. And these over here are modifiers that are added to their dice rolls. Things that they're good at will have a better modifier, but things that they're bad at will have a lower one. A Johnny is very strong, but not the smartest bear in the woods. And they have some powers and abilities, which I'll go into more detail with if they actually play. And this happens, characters can die in this game, which is usually pretty emotional and sad, but great learning experience. And yeah, so I work with people and show them the rules for the game, and then I let them pick their character. These are kind of the 7 characters that I have to choose for this adventure, and they're all members of an army, a mercenary company called the Flaming Fist. And they'll pick one of these sort of Flaming Fist members and be part of a squad together. Broadly, you have kind of the one here who's incredibly devoted to the Flaming Fist, like a very stalwart soldier, grew up in the army sort of person. You have one who's sort of a witch or a sorceress, much more like a cult, and people both respect and fear her. You have a specialist here who, and she has to deal with what it means, like what power means, like good power and bad power, and do you abuse it or do you use it to help people? This person struggles with trying to be accepted, but also like being independent. They're like one of the weakest characters that you can pick, and they're very intelligent, but they struggle with finding a use for themselves in an army that might not accept them because they're not conventional like everybody else. This character has to do with open-hearted leadership. So what does it mean to be an open-hearted leader and courageous? Kind of like your typical sort of Aragorn kind of leader. What does it actually mean to be that person? And how can you lead? So this deals with struggles of leadership and kind of like duty, like doing what is expected of you versus following your heart. That's something interesting that he has going on. This one is a lot about clarity and independence, struggling with being independent versus being a part of the team. And this one is more about competence and being helpful versus being sort of self-centered. So that is characters and their internal struggles, and then I have people pick a character and then add their own details to the character's story. So who are they? Where did they come from? What do you imagine that's not on their sheet here? What could you add about what matters to them? Why did they join the army, for example? What did they hope to get out of their time in the army? Who's waiting for them at home? These are all questions, and it comes to this point of playing this game has people explore parts of themselves in order to create the character. You have to draw the character from somewhere, and the characters you choose always end up being a reflection of yourself. And I encourage people to own that and not feel that they're distanced from their character in some way, but rather to really see themselves as a part of their character and then exploring the things their character explores in their journey and hopefully growing as people throughout. So that's it. That's the foundations of the game. But we're here to talk about conflict. So I do want to bring up how I see this relates back to conflict, because what I was saying at the beginning is this is a space where you can practice conflict and these soft skills in a safe way. So first off, the adventure that they go on here is in a jungle, and there's a conflict presented in the adventure. There are already stakes that the characters are going to work with. And as you can already see also by the characters, they each have an internal conflict as well about who am I and what matters to me. So each player individually gets to struggle with that conflict of who they are. So that's interesting on its own. And then on top of that, there's a broader conflict about the world. In this adventure, they have to travel through the jungle and find a leader of their army who has gone up this river in an area infested with the undead and who has failed to report back. Essentially, the conflict is the fact that the mercenary company is losing a lot of money. This guy has a bunch of resources, but is not really returning on his investment. So you need to go up there and figure out what's going on. And if you can, turn things around. If not, just report back. So that's kind of the broader conflict of the story. And that ends up intersecting with the players and who they are and their choices, because it is open-ended and they do get to make whatever choices they want. And every group that I run this for ends up resolving it differently than the ones who came before. Some have even ignored the commander entirely in favor of abandoning the mercenary company, which is a valid choice. They're allowed to do that. They defected themselves, not wanting to be a part of it. Well, others were unwilling to do that. And this gives the party opportunity to have conflict and practice those muscles of discomfort. One story that I have is that I run these over the course of 3 sessions, and the 3rd session is usually when the story is gonna reach a climax. So at the beginning of the 3rd session, I had one player who's playing the character who's really loyal to the Flaming Fist, this woman who kind of grew up as a military brat. And the party was starting to veer off in a different direction from figuring out what was going on with this commander. They had other things they wanted to resolve in the jungle, traveling to some nearby ruins and talking with a witch who lived there. This player at the top of the session said, "I'm not going to do that. And here's why. We're all members of the Flaming Fist. I owe my allegiance to it, and I owe my allegiance to our high commander. I will not let more time pass where this man has not been held to account. And if he is doing something dangerous or wasting resources, I want to figure that out as quickly as possible. And I think you all should get on board with that, because at the end of the day, the Flaming Fist are the people who put money in your pockets." And he was able to sway the party to change the direction their story was going, and ultimately resulted in a different ending than they would have gotten if they'd gone off towards the witch. So this is sort of the opportunities of who am I, asking those questions, and who are we as a group. And it gives people as well in that example to showcase leadership. And even though this all happens in imaginary space, I want to keep on coming back to the circumstances are imaginary, but the feelings are real. It's still uncomfortable to have conflict, and you still learn how to do it and trust each other and engage in that conflict in this space. There's some interesting stuff about human psychology where we're not totally able to make that distinction between like a dream and reality. Like, granted, we can do it, but when you're in a dream, it tends to feel very real, and then later on your brain can sort of distinguish between something that's real and that's not. But that is something we have to learn how to do. So these experiences can have a profound effect on us, I guess is what I'm trying to say, and actually help people grow as players. And I've seen it a lot. It's actually really beautiful. So yeah, this forces players to own their decisions and weigh the opportunity costs of the different approaches that they might make. If they have a plan and they do it well, this can lead to huge wins for the team. But also, if they fail to coordinate and get on the same page, these adventures can end disastrously for them. And there aren't any preset solutions, so it really is up to the players to figure out what they want to do. It's driven by consequences of their actions. That is really the heart of the game. Is just they make choices, and those choices have consequences. And unlike a video game, there's no booting it back and trying it again. It's like life, where you have to live with those choices, and the story is going to evolve from them. So yeah, that's it. I have found this to be really cool, and I like working with teams with it. Let me talk a little bit about what our offerings are, if this does feel like a good fit for you and something you want to try for your team. Skip over that. So You'll reach out to me. I'll have my contact information at the end of this webinar, and we can schedule your sessions, or we can just schedule a discovery call so we can talk. I can learn about your team. I can kind of present the different adventures that we have for you. And then we play, and before we begin, all of the players will receive a care package with, dice and different things. You can find a link in the chat to our games and where you can book them. At every game, we'll do introductions, like an icebreaker, just getting back into it with each other. And then I'll go over how to role play and the game mechanics. This is something I spend more time on in earlier sessions because it's all new to people, but I'll still touch on it every time. It's just I'll spend less time on it as this gets internalized. Usually our games are 2 weeks apart, so having a reminder and a good chunk of time at the beginning of the session is really useful for getting people back in the flow of this. Then I'll reintroduce them to the plot of the story, their characters, where they last were, kind of pick things up like you're picking up a book and starting it again from where you left off. And we'll also touch on our working agreement if there's anything we want to talk about in terms of like, how can we all get the most out of this? How can we keep each other safe while we're here? How can we make sure that this is an enjoyable experience for everyone, even if it is exciting and dramatic and uncomfortable at times? And then we also do character building with all of them, which is to say I do exercises at the beginning of each game to have them look at their character a little bit more deeply and add details to them, like what was a formative experience for your character as a child, or let's see, when this adventure is over, what do you imagine your character is going to do? These kinds of questions to sort of add depth to it. Game mechanics, I already covered that. And then, yeah, each session is a half day, so about 4 hours. And we'll play, and at the end of each one, we'll do a retrospective. So the retrospectives are space to ask, how did that go and what did you learn? And that is a facilitated conversation that I'll have with them. Usually the first session, the retrospective is going to be really quick. It's just going to be a check-in. How did that go for you all? Does anyone have any thoughts or feelings they want to share? And then we move on. But as we spend less time talking about the rules for engagement and the working agreement and how to role play and the game mechanics at the beginning, that leaves more time at the end to discuss what we're learning and what we're getting out of it, which then applies to the teams in their actual function as a team. It starts to spill out into the team's function elsewhere. So it's this kind of nice combination of being a really fun, creative activity that also has like very clear applications for how your team performs. So we offer 3 different packages with this: storming, norming, and performing. So storming is just a single half-day session, which will sort of unearth whatever's going on for your team and allow them to play together, and can just be sort of a fun, exciting thing to do. Norming is our 3-session package. That's our most popular one. That lets teams develop a little bit more. And then performing is a 7-session package where we can really dive into the story and get some value out of those retrospectives at the end of it. So that is how it works. And these are our cute dice. All right, everyone, that is it for this webinar. We are XBM and Atlassian Solutions Partner. We offer training for public and private groups in person and online for the Atlassian suite of products. We also offer consulting solutions, comprehensive consulting on the Atlassian suite of products. This is something you can sort of set up a discovery call with us with, and we can talk about our offerings. And custom development for all sorts of add-ons for your software needs. So that's that. If you want to find our upcoming webinars, you can go on xbm.com. Go to training. Here we talk about our approach to training. Everything here in blue is free sign up, free webinar. Everything down here in green is a paid class. And here at the bottom are our upcoming events. Some of them you buy tickets for, those are classes that you can register for, and some of them are free webinars that are you can sign up for. And here you can see there's today's webinar. Thanks for coming. My trust webinar will be coming up, although I think it's a little bit farther out, so it's not on here yet. But if you keep an eye on my LinkedIn, you can find it. If you also keep an eye on the XBM LinkedIn, you can also find our upcoming trust webinar. If that's something you'd like to attend, you can also go to our YouTube channel and find the trust webinars that I've done in the past, although I'm making some tweaks to it, so I recommend coming to our new one. All right, and I think that's it. My email is in the chat, so you can feel free to reach out to me there if you'd like to schedule one of these. But thank you so much for coming and listening, and I hope that this was helpful for you and hopefully enjoyable and engaging. All right, till next time.